First on BBC Two Newsnight.
If Judith Ward, on bail after the best part of 2 decades in jail, didn't commit the M62 bombing, who did? Good evening. The Holloway One never acquired the fame or the following of the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4 or the Maguire 7. But does Judith Ward's release after 18 years of unjust imprisonment indicate that there's still something rotten in the British legal system, or that it may be cleansing itself? Annie Maguire was in maximum security with Judith Ward for 8 years. John Stalker is the Assistant Chief Constable who found himself frozen out for asking awkward questions in Northern Ireland. Alistair Logan, Judith Ward's lawyer for 6 years, says a similar case could happen again. Paddy Ashdown says it's time to thrash out an alternative to non-stop conservatism. I'll be asking him whether it isn't barefaced cheek to suggest the Labour Party realigns itself around him. And as 2 big banks battle for control of a 3rd big bank, what of the little people and the small businesses who give all 3 of them their profits? The law in this country is so stupid, I feel very bitter. We all do. We've been left with nothing. Those weren't the words of Judith Ward or any of her supporters, but of Anne Morrison, who lost a sister, her brother-in-law and 2 nephews aged 5 and 2 in the M62 coach bomb. Mrs. Morrison feels the victims have been forgotten and wants the police now, 18 years on, to set about catching the murderers of her family. West Yorkshire Police told Newsnight tonight that they were re-examining the evidence. In the short term, though, the release of Judy Ward on bail, pending a formal quashing of her conviction, raises yet again the questions not merely of how the wrong person got locked up for an Irish Republican outrage, but why the judicial process so signally failed to correct its mistake. It's taken 18 years for the British legal system to concede that all 18 people convicted in 4 terrorist cases in 1974 weren't guilty. Judith Ward's first night of freedom leaves the British legal establishment claiming it couldn't happen now. Her conviction, based on confessions made while in a state of mental instability and discredited scientific evidence, would, they say, be impossible now. But why has it taken 18 years to right the wrong? Campaigners, including some previous victims of miscarriages of justice, kept up a relentless campaign once Miss Ward had decided to appeal. Paddy Hill, one of the Birmingham 6, has set up a support group for the victims.
Judith Ward was like us, a scapegoat. They knew that young girl was 92 miles away. They have the hotel receipts and all. And not one police officer in her case believed for 1 second that she was guilty. Yet they still went ahead and prosecuted her.
But if she, the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4 were innocent, where are the killers? The M62 bombing Judith Ward was convicted of was just one of a series of horrific outrages for which it now seems no one's been caught. In the Judith Ward case, campaigners claim to have identified a different woman who was responsible for the bombing. She's never been charged. In the case of the Birmingham pub bombings, in which 21 people died, 6 men were arrested and sentenced to life, when strong evidence suggests that a different 4 men were involved. One of these men is now serving a life sentence in Portlaoise jail on a different offence, but the other 3 are believed to be living freely in Ireland. And the Guildford and Woolwich bombings, far from involving the 4 men jailed 9 months later, seem to have been carried out by 3 of the 4 men captured in the Balcombe Street siege 6 months after the bombings, and a 4th man jailed in the north of England for other terrorist offences. All 4 provided detailed evidence of their involvement. They are all now in jail, although they've never been charged with the Guildford and Woolwich bombings.
In the Guildford and Woolwich case, there's no doubt that the authorities realised from a fairly early stage, probably from the time the Balcombe Street IRA unit were captured, that they got the wrong people, and they chose not to own up for fear of the public outcry. In the Birmingham case, I think they genuinely believed that they got the right people, and some of them still do to this day. In the Judith Ward case, I think it's very hard to believe that any intelligent person looking at Judith Ward at that time could believe that she was the person who was involved in these bombings.
But could the wrongful imprisonments happen again? When the Guildford 4 came out 2.5 years ago, an inquiry was set up. It still hasn't reported. After the Birmingham 6 came out, a royal commission was established to examine all aspects of the criminal justice system. Its report isn't due until next summer. But in the meantime, some changes have already been made to the criminal justice system. The Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984 requires confessions to be tape recorded. The creation of the Crown Prosecution Service in 1987 means there's more chance of the defence being provided with all relevant details in a case.
The most common feature of all these cases has been the failure of those in authority to disclose large amounts of evidence that ought to have been disclosed to the defence and to go to some lengths to conceal it. And anyone who's attended the recent High Court hearings, listening to the authorities in several of these cases explaining why they can't disclose this or that, will realise that there hasn't much changed, that the attitudes haven't changed all that much yet.
No one, least of all the bombers, doubts the difficulties the police face in trying to break IRA cells like the one which firebombed the Metro Centre in Newcastle this weekend. The last thing they need is a prevailing cast of mind which makes juries inclined to doubt them even when they've brought the right people to court. With us in the studio now is Anne Maguire, who served 9 years in prison, 8 of them with Judy Ward in Durham Jail. Durham Jail maximum security is a pretty tough sort of place. What sort of a state was Miss Ward in during the time that she was in there?
Well, when I went to the Durham in 1976, Judy was very unstable. Physically, she wasn't a well person either. You know, her health wasn't too good. And, I mean, you know, when I seen Judy first, when I met her, I knew there and then that she couldn't have been capable of doing what they said she'd done.
Why not?
Well, you know, she just wasn't that type of person. Judy's very soft-hearted. She loves children, you know.
You see, what's mystifying is why it took effectively 17 years for her to appeal.
Well, just like the rest of us, back in '76, there were 5 of us, Category A, done for the Irish Terrace, and 5 women in Durham. And we felt that nobody wanted to listen. Well, the public didn't see or hear us for the people we were. They believed what the papers wrote about us. And we felt that, you know, the world was against us. There were terrible crimes that happened. And, you know, we felt there and then that we were just forgotten.
Some of the Birmingham 6 said that the warders didn't actually treat them as if they were the bombers, that the warders had a suspicion that they were not guilty as charged. How did the prison staff treat Judy Ward?
Well, I only can speak about Durham. The officers in Durham prison treated you as you treated them. If you abused them, they would give you back just as good. They explained to us that they were there doing a job. They weren't there to judge. They were not the judges. And that we had to do our time as best we could to get out.
Does the what's happened today with the release of Miss Ward, does that restore your faith in the legal system?
It does, because back then in '76, those crimes were terrible crimes, and nobody could blame the people, police and that, for wanting to get these people who were murdering innocent people. I think today they've realised the wrong that has happened back then, and they're starting now to clean it up.
Well, now, with us in the studio are Alistair Logan, who was Judy Ward's solicitor for 6 years, and joining us from Manchester, John Stalker, the former Assistant Chief Constable, famous Stalker inquiry. Mr. Stalker, are you satisfied this couldn't happen again?
Well, I think he would be a very foolish person who said that miscarriages of justice are finished forever. I think that the chances of it occurring are far less. But of course, who knows, in 18 years' time we may be hearing about cases that are going wrong today.
Alistair Logan?
I think that as long as you have a system that depends on an old boy network and the goodwill between lawyers to disclose documents and is not backed by the force of law, there is always a possibility.
But the fact of the matter is that the question of disclosure of documents to the defence is a much improved procedure now compared to what it was then, isn't it?
Well, it might be, but look at all the difficulty that occurred in the Ward case in getting out the information that was in the hands of the Home Office regarding her mental and physical state when she was in jail. All those records took ages to come. And likewise, the information that related to the psychiatric assessments of her while she was in Durham. And I think that you've got to approach the whole business upon the basis that it is not for the prosecution to decide what you may and may not have. And the other thing you would do well to remember is that these are cases which are regarded as being covered by security. And as long as that label applies to them, different rules will apply.
John Stalker, do you accept that essential distinction that a matter of security is handled differently?
Yes, and the situation is the same now. The Prevention of Terrorism Act still overrules, in many ways, the workings of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. Certain clauses within that are suspended for alleged terrorist offences, and quite rightly so. I don't disagree with that, but it does, I would suggest, make it more likely that terrorists or suspected terrorists are going to be dealt with differently from, shall we say, murderers or rapists.
And presumably it is conceivable that somebody held under the Prevention of Terrorism Act for a much longer period than would otherwise be the case might be likely to sign something that somebody held less lengthy period of time might not sign.
Well, I would say that if they were experienced and hardened and trained terrorists, that probably isn't likely to happen. But if they were people on the fringes of it or not involved at all, yes, then I would agree with what you've just said.
Do you not agree it's time to ban cases based on uncorroborated statements?
I think we're moving very quickly towards that. I think that in practice juries already are applying that doctrine. Of course it's not within the law yet, but I suspect that the Runciman Committee may very well recommend it in line with the Scottish case. Now, if that happens, my feeling is, with my policeman's hat on, is that a lot of guilty people who have admitted things and for whom there is no corroborative evidence will probably walk free, but that may be a price that we have to pay to make sure that innocent people are not convicted.
And so much has changed since the Judith Ward case, the tape recording of statements, for example, the institution of the Crown Prosecution Service. What other changes would you like to see, Alistair Logan?
Well, three major ones. First of all, I would take away from judges the right to comment on evidence, which I think is something which has led to a significant contribution to these miscarriages of justice. Secondly, I would take away from the Court of Appeal the right to deal with cases involving new evidence. And I would have a whole system to deal with cases of appeal which resulted in the Court of Appeal not being able to sit as a jury. And thirdly, I would bring all terrorist cases within the full force of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. I would not have an exclusion.
Is it your feeling, John Stalker, that most of those changes will be acceptable to the police or not?
Probably not. The dealing with terrorist offenders in exactly the same way. For example, a very powerful weapon for the police is to deprive suspected terrorists of legal advice. Now, in view of what we've seen over the last few years, the last couple of years, I think probably it would be a very foolish policeman who decided not to allow a suspected terrorist access to a solicitor. My view is that even though the law allows for it, a prudent policeman would still allow a solicitor at an early stage to avoid some of the problems that we've seen recently of allegations regarding uncorroborated confessions.
The other troubling thing about this particular case is, of course, how long it took before this apparent miscarriage of justice was set right. There is a proposal from the Law Society that there be some sort of independent body to scrutinise alleged miscarriages of justice with the power to refer to the Court of Appeal. Is that something you think would be a good idea?
Yes, one of the great stumbling blocks and a matter of great frustration to the police force has been the delay within the Home Office for certainly as long as I was a detective. That was 25 years. I think that the responsibility for the sifting and the deciding should probably be taken away from the Home Office and given to some sort of quasi-judicial inquiry, shall we say a miscarriages of justice committee or an alleged miscarriages of justice committee who can sort the wheat from the chaff, because the Home Office at the moment are swamped with so many other duties that this was one of those almost extraneous jobs that they had to do, which would probably be best done by some group which was committed to that and nothing else.
As to Logan?
Yes, and I would think that that group could have as part of its makeup people who were experienced in the scientific and other disciplines that are needed to look into these cases, and should have extensive powers for the compulsion of the release of information, because information is not always stored in the hands of the police. It may be in a variety of other places, and it may have bearing on the case.
John Stalker, there is, of course, the question if Miss Ward is exonerated from this, it leaves the question of who did carry out the bombing. Don't you think the police owe it to the families of those who died to restart a full, thoroughgoing investigation?
Well, yes, but I've got a feeling it would be not much more than a gesture. The West Midlands Chief Constable, for example, said that the Birmingham 6 inquiry would be reopened, and I'm quite sure that to some extent it has been. I mean, politically and emotionally, and the whole sense of justice dictates that that should happen. But being pragmatic about it and being practical about it, the chances now, after 18 years, of finding the right people are almost negligent and negligible. And don't let's forget that the people may not even be in circulation now. So yes, the answer to your question is that the West Yorkshire Police, and I understand they already have, said that they have already got the wheels rolling, but I wouldn't hold my breath for any real results from that.
John Stalker, Alistair Logan and Maguire, thank you. Now, as if the Labour Party isn't in enough disarray already, Paddy Ashdown's thrown another firecracker into their centre with his suggestion that they join forces with the Liberal Democrats in what he calls a broader movement dedicated to an electable alternative to the Conservatives. It isn't a formal pact he's proposing, let alone anything like the late lamented alliance, but it's the first sign of possible realignment on the left after 4 general election defeats in a row. The Liberal Democrats, of course, emerged from the last election with even fewer seats than they had before. I'll be finding out what exactly Mr. Ashdown has in mind in a moment. Before that, Peter Kellner has been uncovering the process of elimination which led to this latest proposal.
In the great days of liberalism, reform and power marched hand in hand. The image of William Gladstone, the greatest of all liberal reformers, dominates the National Liberal Club, home of the party's grand traditions. 2 months ago, Paddy Ashdown came here to launch his party's election campaign. He had 2 possible routes to power. His first lay through a hung parliament. This, he hoped, would lead to the prize of a new voting system. His alternative hope was that the Tories would win so decisively that Labour would fall apart, and he could then pick up the pieces. His problem today is that there's no hung parliament and Labour isn't disintegrating. He's had to return to the drawing board. He could follow the example of Liberals like Sir William Beveridge and pursue influence more than power. His ideas led to the welfare state, just as those of John Maynard Keynes led to the full employment policies adopted by Labour and Tory governments after the war. The Liberals' 1955 manifesto was the first to advocate a united Europe. More recently, the party has started debates on the Citizens' Charter and constitutional reform. But on Saturday, Paddy Ashdown told his supporters in his Yeovil constituency that he rejected the influence not power option, and also the Mick Corber option of waiting vainly for better times.
I have little sympathy for those who say that having won back our position in politics, we should now be satisfied with being no more than, for instance, a party of local government, or a testbed for new political ideas. And I have no sympathy either for those who believe that politics is the art of waiting for something to turn up.
That left him with just one option. To win power, the Liberal Democrats would have to work with other parties.
Our role is to be the catalyst, the gathering point for a broader movement dedicated to winning the battle of ideas. A broader movement which will give Britain an electable alternative to the Conservative government. I do not believe that mathematically constructed pacts and alliances are the way forward. At best, they would be a waste of precious time, at worst, positively damaging. What is, however, in both our interests and that of the country, is to work with others, a wide range of others, to assemble the ideas around which a non-socialist alternative to the Conservatives can be constructed.
The Scottish Constitutional Convention already provides an example of cross-party cooperation. The Liberal Democrats are working with Labour and with people outside party politics on plans for devolved power. Cooperation is feasible in other areas. Freedom of information, a Bill of Rights, well-funded public services, training, public transport, European integration, aid for the Third World. These are all matters where the gap between Labour and the Liberal Democrats could be closed. You don't need a crystal ball to see where the logic of all that could lead. A formal pact to fight elections and work together in Parliament. An updated version of talks held here 90 years ago when the Liberals gave the infant Labour Party a free run in some seats to help it get established at Westminster. So far, Paddy Ashdown is some way from discussing any kind of pact at national level. But locally, it's a different story.
I'm recommending that we continue the pact because, proportionally, the voters of Portsmouth did not vote for a Conservative administration.
Yesterday morning, Liberal Democratic councillors in Portsmouth met to decide whether to continue their pact with Labour. The Tories are the largest party in the Hung City Council, but they've been kept in opposition by the Labour-Liberal Democrat coalition. Group leader Mike Hancock is keen to get the deal through.
I will move formally from the chair that we agree as a group to continue the joint administration of the City of Portsmouth.
And I will formally second.
All those in favour? Right, that's a unanimous decision.
Michael Thomas Hancock, Liberal Democrat.
Mike Hancock was also his party's candidate for Portsmouth South in last month's general election. He failed to take the seat by only 242 votes. He feels that his result has a clear message for the opposition parties nationally.
We ourselves have to make some compromises if we really do want to see the Tories out at the next general election. The Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party have to realise that their future are now, I believe, linked very closely together. Our success at the next general election will determine on us finding sufficient common ground to enable a pact of some description where candidates on both sides stand down or aren't selected in the first place to enable a free run at the Tory party candidate at the election. If that succeeds, we'll succeed, and the people of this country will have a change of government. There is an amazing amount of common ground, and I'm sure that common ground on policy issues will grow over the next 4 years.
Alex Carlyle supports the thrust of Paddy Ashdown's speech, but warns against pushing its logic as far as Mike Hancock wants to go.
I think we should stop all this talk about deals. It sickens me in many ways. And we should go back to the drawing board, start with first principles. We must decide what our principles are, just as the other parties must reassess their principles. If after the period of reassessment we find that we've actually come up with broadly the same policies and principles as another party, then maybe that will naturally lead to discussions, but I certainly don't think it should be a starting point.
What do the Liberal Democrats' 6 million voters want? On election day, 45% preferred coalition with the Tories in the event of a hung parliament, according to NOP's exit poll, while fewer, 33%, wanted a coalition with Labour. That 45% might rebel against an overtly left-of-centre strategy. So which way will the Liberal Democrats go? Paddy Ashdown's dilemma is this. If Labour does respond to his overtures, he may then have to abandon his even-handed approach to the two main parties and repudiate the prospect of working with the Conservatives. If it does that, he may drive away many of the people who voted for his party in last month's general election. So far, Paddy Ashdown has refused to climb down from that particular fence. At some point, he may have to. It'll be a decisive moment for his leadership. The stakes could scarcely be higher.
To many in the Labour Party, the Ashdown initiative is hardly welcome. Labour's been doing quite enough soul-searching of its own lately without offers of unity from outside. But some have risen to the challenge and hinted they may agree with at least part of the leader of the Liberal Democrats' remarks. To keepers of the socialist flame, anything that smacks of deals, except in dire emergencies like the Lib Lab Pact, which kept Jim Callaghan in Downing Street, is to be avoided like the plague. But after Labour's fourth failure in a row, some are beginning to concede the only chance of any rosy future lies in some sort of realignment to build an anti-Conservative alliance.
I just recognise a stark reality, which is that ever since 1974, when the Liberals began to run candidates in every seat in the country, the left of centre vote has been effectively divided in Britain, and the result of that has been that 4 elections in a row we've had a minority Tory government being elected, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us who want to change that situation to try to explore all possibilities to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Reaction elsewhere has been distinctly cooler. Mr Ashdown's critical tone stung a party which cannot formally respond because it's still in the grips of a leadership contest. Brian Gould, a contender for both the top jobs, called the proposals interesting, but suggested Mr Ashdown should distance himself from attacks on Labour. What would be worth talking about, he said, isn't any formal deal, but a common position that would demonstrate that the Tories are a minority. As on other sensitive issues, John Smith has stayed stum so far. But Robin Cook, his campaign manager for the leadership, said Paddy Ashdown must drop the pretence he adopted during the election that he could do deals with the Tories. Margaret Beckett, who's in the ring for the deputy leadership, said she could do without being patronised by Mr Ashdown. My main reaction is to remind him the Labour Party gained 40 seats and has over 270 MPs and has more people in its shadow cabinet than he has in his parliamentary party. But what has angered some Labour MPs more than anything is Mr Ashdown's ambition to build a non-socialist alternative to the Tories.
Having just lost an election, a little humility from Paddy Ashdown would be quite welcome. But having called for a dialogue of ideas and then ruled out the socialists, all that Paddy Ashdown wants is some to the left of him, some to the right of him in the centre, brokering for power. That is not the way for the Labour Party, and I emphatically reject it.
Paddy Ashdown, it's quite clear you can't expect the Labour Party to engage in any kind of dialogue with you as long as you think they're as unpalatable as the Conservatives. Do you?
At present, yes. But then I've marked in my speech a number of key areas where I believe Labour's moving anyway, which would have to be put right before Labour could take part in any broader discussion, which would incorporate, incidentally, others in a meaningful fashion. One of those is a commitment to proportional representation. One is an understanding of the nature of importance of liberal democracies, and one is the importance of being a party that represents the consumer rather than just the producer. Now, these are the issues which have to be addressed by Labour. But if I may say to you, Jeremy, I think what we don't want at present, and I know you want to push me into it, but we don't want, is a return to the trench warfare of the election. That was 4 weeks ago. I think we have a very short period in politics of 3 or 4 months after an election when politicians can rise above the trench warfare, keep their parties out of that, and begin to assess what needs to be done for our country. Right. And for the health of our democracy and the construction of an effective opposition to the Conservatives, as well as for all those things like social cohesion of our nation, I think that there is a broad discussion that can be had between parties for advantage of the individual parties and for the advantage of the nation.
But you are saying that you haven't changed your position on the Labour Party from the position you espoused during the election.
I'm a party which ours is a party which is committed to the removal of the Conservatives, but it's not committed to the removal of the Conservatives and handing over power to Labour in its present form.
But let me just proud cuckoo land to expect to be able to build any kind of movement with the Labour Party that is non-socialist?
No. Take a look at, for instance, Robin Cook's very interesting article in The Observer this week. Talked about Labour moving precisely to the positions I've just described. I could have written every word of it. And now, if the Labour Party is to continue its progress to reform, if it's going to continue to understand the importance of electoral reform and make a commitment to it, then it, along with others, and let me make clear, Jeremy, this is not a discussion between ourselves and Labour. This is a discussion which, along the model that you suggested of the Scottish Convention, ought also to involve those who don't belong to any political party and the other political parties like the Greens. There is much to discuss. I have a view that there is now the ingredients for what I would call a chemical reaction on the progressive forces in British politics, which may well produce the end of the old duopoly between Tory and Labour, which has blighted our politics so long, in favour of a much more pluralist approach, a European approach, in which parties can cooperate, but they can also compete.
Is it still your ambition to replace the Labour Party?
It's my ambition to make sure that my party prospers and succeeds, and that means it wins against any opposition. And you wouldn't take a politician seriously who didn't say that. But again,
I'm sorry, it is your ambition to replace the Labour Party, or it isn't?
It's my ambition to make sure my party is the party of government against whatever opposition is there. You wouldn't take me seriously if I didn't say that.
Well, I'm just trying to... I don't understand the answer, I'm sorry. Are you seeking to replace the Labour Party or not?
I want my party to be able to win against the Labour Party to become the government of this country. But, Jeremy, again, you are...
So you are seeking, you would still like
Jeremy,
to.
let me just see if I can put it this way. You are seeking to read British politics solely in its present duopolistic...
No, I'm quoting back to you your own ambition expressed during the election.
Of course I wish to make sure that my party prospers, but I want something else as well.
Well, that wasn't what you were saying 4 weeks ago.
I want to create a system of politics which is much more pluralistic, much more along the lines of what's happening in Europe, and I think the ingredients are there to create that, in which parties can, yes, compete, but they can also cooperate. We have a system at present in Britain where parties must fight each other. I think there's much we can work together on, across all parties.
You say, I do not believe that mathematically constructed pacts and alliances are the way forward. Does that mean you don't believe in any pacts or alliances?
I don't believe that that's where this will end, and I don't believe they're feasible. I do believe...
You don't believe in them?
I do not believe that pacts are where this will end. I don't believe that they're feasible, and I don't believe they're practical.
I'm not asking you to read the future. I'm asking you what you believe.
But you are. I'm telling you that I do not...
Do you think they're a bad idea in all circumstances?
I do not believe that they are feasible. And I think that is the important... But what is feasible...
Isn't that where it would end up?
No, not necessarily. It could end up in a number of different ways. I don't, frankly, know where it will end up. And I'm quite plain about that. I believe that there's a process to be started. None of us can predict where it will end up. But what I do believe will happen is that in the process we'll make Britain's democracy much more healthy. We'll move to a more pluralistic base for our political system. And the result of that will be we will construct a decent, sensible, electable alternative to the Conservatives.
The logical end point of that is either a pact or it may even be a merger.
No, not necessarily. That's not the way it's ended up in Scotland.
But if you all agree on...
No, but it isn't the way it's ended up in Scotland.
No, but if you all agree on policies, what's the point of having separate parties?
In Scotland, the parties have maintained their different identity. They've attached themselves to very progressive ideas about the convention, but they're still able to compete. You see, you are insisting on pushing us back to the old duopolistic style that is broken in Britain. The fact is that when Labour lost its capacity to beat the Conservatives, and I believe they have comprehensively and historically lost that, the old duopoly upon which Britain has been run in the past has been broken. Now, we have to find a new model for politics, and I happen to believe that a pluralistic model is now in prospect, a model much more in tune with modern European democracies, a model, as I say, where parties can compete, but they can also cooperate.
It really is a bit much, isn't it, for you, a party which made no progress in the election, to be asking the Labour Party to realign itself around you?
Jeremy, if you want to go back to the election and fight in terms of the election, by all means do so. I believe that we have 3, 4 or 5 months to break free of that. I believe it's the job of party leaders to try and raise themselves above the electoral trenches. We're now talking about a unique opportunity in Britain. In my view, it will only be there for 4 or 5 months. And I think politicians who have the health of our democracy, and many of those who've been left out of the Conservative vision, the poor and the disadvantaged and the homeless in their minds, ought to be prepared to take that chance and to see what they can do to bring about that new style of politics.
You heard what Peter Kellner said there about what polling evidence suggests, and that we all treat opinion polls with buckets of salt nowadays.
So you should.
But it seems to suggest that a larger proportion of your supporters actually are more inclined to do a deal with the Conservatives than are inclined to do a deal with the Labour Party. A very dangerous manoeuvre for you, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Nothing you can do in politics is without risk. But I happen to believe that this is a moment when leaders particularly should be able to raise themselves above the battles, should be able to see what can be done, should be able to work for what they consider to be not in the narrow party interests for themselves, but the broader interests of the nation. What I'm listening to now is those people who've been left out of the political debate, who haven't got anybody to vote for yet. I want to make sure that they are heard. I want to make sure that our democracy is given a decent, effective opposition. I want to make sure that that new politics, which I believe can grow in Britain, is made to grow, and the opportunities that are there are taken. That's what leadership is about, and I think it's what political parties, after an election, ought to be about as well, putting the nation just a bit before their narrow party interests.
Paddy Ashdown, thank you very much. Thanks. In a moment, how Lloyd's proposed takeover of the Midland Bank could change high street banking for individual customers and small businesses alike. Before that, a quick look at today's other main news stories. The Queen makes her first speech to the European Parliament in Strasbourg tomorrow, but its pro-Europe message might cause controversy at Westminster. She's expected to say that differences of national parliamentary tradition are insignificant against the background of European commitment to reconciliation and democracy. Some Conservative Eurosceptics say the speech will reopen old party wounds ahead of next week's vote to ratify the Maastricht Treaty. Nicholas Budgeon told Newsnight Tonight he was appalled at the speech. He claimed democracy was rooted in Britain and not in other countries. Teddy Taylor said many MPs were horrified that the Queen was being asked to read what amounted to a controversial political speech. European Community foreign ministers have decided to withdraw their ambassadors from Belgrade as fighting intensified between Muslims and Serbs in Bosnia. The Red Cross has warned it may be forced to withdraw from the Bosnian capital Sarajevo, where 28 people have been killed in the last 24 hours. At the EC Foreign Ministers meeting in Brussels, the Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd has defied agreement on the abolition of internal border controls, which are due to be scrapped from the end of the year. Mr. Hurd said it was essential to maintain border checks to prevent crime and illegal immigration. Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party in Iraq has threatened to stop democratic elections in Kurdistan. In a statement, the party said the elections were an attempt to create a separate Kurdish state. The Iraqi army has been building up its presence in the area, suggesting a possible military crackdown is imminent. A quick look on the markets now. In the city, shares closed at another record level. The 100-share index closed up 12 points at 2737.8. In New York, the Dow was up 28 points at 33.98. On the foreign exchanges, sterling was virtually unchanged against the mark at 2 marks 94. Against the dollar, the pound rose a fifth of a cent to close at just over $1.79. Well, Oscar Wilde would doubtless have found some phrase along the lines of the unspeakable in pursuit of the uneatable to describe the chase between the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank and Lloyds for the Midland. For an institution in trouble, Midland are behaving pretty cavalierly towards the conditional bid from Lloyds, despite the fact that at £3.7 billion, it's higher than the merger value put on them by Hong Kong and Shanghai. The Bank Employees Union claims 30,000 jobs could be lost if the Lloyds bid's successful. In all of this, we've heard plenty about employees and shareholders, but little about the people the banks claim they want to serve, the customers. Our business correspondent Ian Carson tries now to redress the balance.
73,574, thank you. 74 in the front. 74.5.
An auction of small businesses in London this afternoon. If there's an end to the recession, there's no sign of it here. For about half the lots on offer, there are no takers. Events like this are a reflection of over-enthusiastic bank lending in the 80s boom years. Most of the businesses coming under the hammer are among the 3,500 put into receivership last year by the major clearing banks. Now they are exposed to £5.5 billion of bad debt. But of all the major banks, the problems for Midland are most acute. The accumulation of debt has left the bank vulnerable to city creditors.
Third and last time, sold £80,000.
The last 10 years have been a nightmare for the Griffin. Lending to the Third World led to potential losses of almost £2 billion. Bad debts at home, largely from lending to businesses hit by the recession, are nearly £900 million. Other banks share these problems, but the Griffin has some of its own. It bought Crocker Bank in California in 1980, which turned out to be riddled with bad debt. 6 years later, Midland sold Crocker, but was stuck with the debt. The cost to Midland, about another £1 billion. Its stockbroking arm, set up in 1986 for the city's Big Bang, had to be closed barely a year later because of its losses. This time, a mere £35 million.
I'll that one on the spot, thank you.